The ashes were still smoldering in our gravel driveway when my father threw the empty gasoline can at my feet. "Education is wasted on a woman like you," he sneered, his voice cutting through the thick, acrid smoke. "Go work as a maid. You belong in a kitchen, not a university." I watched my dreams, years of perfect grades, late-night studying, and my hard-earned college acceptance letters turn into black dust right before my eyes. My father smiled, confident he had finally broken me and trapped me under his thumb forever. But less than 24 hours later, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. It was my high school principal, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and shock. "Your father lied to us, and he lied to you. He rejected your full-ride scholarship on your behalf." Before the reality of his betrayal could even sink in, a sleek, black government vehicle with tinted windows pulled up outside our house. My father looked out the window, his face completely draining of color as a decorated military colonel stepped out of the car. My father's hands began to shake as he whispered, How is this possible?" He had no idea that his cruelest act was about to unlock a secret that would ruin him completely. "My name is Maya, and at 24 years old, I finally know what it feels like to breathe freely. But if you had told my 18-year-old self that I would ever escape my father's shadow, I wouldn't have believed you." The ashes were still smoldering in our gravel driveway when my father threw the empty gasoline can at my feet. "Education is wasted on a woman like you," he sneered, his voice cutting through the thick, acrid smoke. "Go work as a maid. You belong in a kitchen, not a university." I watched my dreams, years of perfect grades, late-night studying, and my hard-earned college acceptance letters turn into black dust right before my eyes. My father, Arthur, was a deeply bitter and controlling man who ruled our household with an iron fist. He ran a small, struggling logistics company in our town, and he viewed everyone around him, especially me, as property to be managed. To Arthur, my sole purpose in life was to clean his house, cook his meals, and eventually be married off to one of his local business associates to increase his own social standing. He despised my ambition. For years, I had secretly stayed up past midnight, studying by the glow of a flashlight, determined to score high enough on my SATs to earn a way out of that suffocating environment. When the acceptance letters from 3 top-tier universities finally arrived in our mailbox, I thought I had won my freedom. But Arthur found them first. He didn't just hide them. He dragged me outside by the wrist and forced me to watch as he poured accelerant over the cardboard folders and struck a match. He smiled, confident he had finally broken me. I felt a cold numbness settle into my chest. But as I stood there staring at the ruins of my hard work, my phone suddenly buzzed in my pocket. It was an unknown number, and when I answered, the trembling, furious voice of my high school principal changed everything. "Maya, thank God you picked up," Mrs. Gable, my principal, said, her voice shaking with an intensity that immediately made me sit up straighter. "I'm sitting here reviewing the final district reports, and something looked completely wrong. I need you to tell me the truth. Did you really decline the Vanguard scholarship?" The ground beneath my feet felt like it was shifting. The Vanguard was a prestigious, full-ride university scholarship that covered everything from tuition to housing. It was my golden ticket. "No," I whispered, gripping the phone tightly as I glanced out the window at my father, who was casually washing the ash off his hands at the garden hose. "I never declined it. I've been waiting for the final confirmation paperwork to arrive." There was a heavy, horrified silence on the other end of the line. "Maya, your father came into the district office 2 weeks ago. He presented a signed letter bearing your signature, officially rejecting the fund and stating that you were entering the family business instead. He told us you changed your mind." A wave of pure, white-hot fury crashed through my numbness. He hadn't just burned my letters today. He had actively stolen my future weeks ago, forging my name to lock me in this cage. I hung up the phone, marched straight into the kitchen, and confronted him. Arthur didn't even blink. He took a slow sip of his coffee and looked at me with cold amusement. "I did what was best for this family," he said smoothly. "You're staying right here. Now, stop this crying and go clean the guest room. My business partners are coming tomorrow, and the house needs to be spotless." He thought he had won. He had no idea the clock was already ticking. To understand why my father was so desperate to keep me trapped, you have to understand the ghost that haunted our halls. My older brother, Leo, had been the golden boy of the family. He was brilliant, athletic, and possessed a quiet kindness that Arthur completely despised. Arthur had tried to mold Leo into a ruthless businessman just like himself, but when Leo resisted, Arthur forced him into the military, using guilt and financial manipulation to push him into enlistment to satisfy his own failed ego. Tragically, 2 years ago, Leo's unit was ambushed during a deployment overseas. He was officially declared missing in action. The town wept for him, but inside our house, the grieving process was disturbingly short. Within weeks, Arthur was using Leo's substantial military death benefits and payout funds to inject cash into his own failing logistics company. He bought a new fleet of delivery vans, upgraded his lifestyle, and completely erased Leo's presence from our home. He ordered me to pack up Leo's bedroom, throwing away his sports trophies and high school yearbooks as if my brother had never existed. Whenever I tried to bring up Leo's memory, Arthur would shut me down with an aggressive shout, claiming we needed to focus on the future of the family business. I always thought it was just his twisted way of dealing with grief, but looking back, the timeline made no sense. Arthur's business had been on the verge of bankruptcy right before Leo went missing. Now, after discovering my father's willingness to forge my signature, a dark, sickening thought began to take root in my mind. What else had Arthur lied about? What else was he hiding inside those locked filing cabinets in his office? I was determined to find out, but the answers were already driving toward our front door. The next afternoon, the oppressive silence of our house was broken by the sound of laughter coming from the living room. My father was hosting Mr. Henderson, a powerful local landlord and investor. Arthur was in rare form, boastfully puffing out his chest, swirling a glass of expensive whiskey, and discussing his grand plans to expand his logistics empire. He spoke as if he were a visionary tycoon, completely ignoring the fact that his business was built on a foundation of lies and stolen dreams. I stood in the kitchen, quietly preparing a tray of appetizers as ordered, feeling like a ghost in my own home. Suddenly, the loud, rhythmic thrum of a high-powered engine vibrated through the floorboards. I looked out the kitchen window just as a sleek, premium black government sedan pulled into our gravel driveway. The car stopped with theatrical precision, its tires parking directly over the black, scorched marks where my college acceptance letters had been reduced to ash just the day before. Arthur's laughter abruptly cut off. He and Mr. Henderson peered through the living room blinds. I could see the immediate shift in my father's posture, his arrogance instantly shattered, replaced by a tense, unexplainable look of anxiety. He assumed it was a high-profile client or perhaps a city official he could manipulate to his advantage, but as the driver's side door swung open, his face completely drained of color. A stern, imposing army colonel stepped out into the afternoon sun, the gold and silver insignia on his immaculate uniform gleaming in the light. He carried a thick leather ledger under his arm, and his eyes locked onto our front door. The heavy brass knocker on our front door echoed through the house, like a gavel hitting a sounding board. My father stood frozen in the center of the living room, his hands trembling so violently that a few drops of whiskey spilled over the rim of his glass. Mr. Henderson looked on in confusion, but Arthur looked as if he were staring at an executioner. When nobody moved, I walked past them and opened the door. The colonel didn't offer a polite greeting. He took off his formal cap, stepped squarely over the threshold, and pushed right past a paralyzed Arthur. His gaze swept over the expensive new furniture before settling directly on me. "Are you Maya Whitaker?" he asked, his deep voice carrying a commanding weight that filled the entire room. I nodded, my heart hammering against my ribs. "My name is Colonel Vance. I've traveled here from the Department of Military Records. We need to discuss your brother, Leo, and the trust fund associated with his service." Arthur finally found his voice, stepping forward with a forced, sweating smile. "Colonel, I am his father, and the head of this household. Any financial matters regarding my late son go through me." Colonel Vance didn't even look at him. Instead, he opened the thick leather ledger and laid it flat on the coffee table. "Actually, Mr. Whitaker, before your son deployed, he filed strict legal paperwork explicitly naming his sister, Maya, as his sole beneficiary and next of kin. Furthermore, the Military Finance Division has spent the last year secretly auditing your corporate accounts." The colonel turned to me, his expression softening just a fraction. "Maya, your brother established a restricted educational trust fund containing nearly $500,000, meant exclusively for your university tuition. Your father has spent the last 18 months fraudulently forging your signature to drain it into his business." The silence that followed was suffocating. Mr. Henderson quietly excused himself, practically running out the front door, leaving my father entirely alone to face the consequences of his greed. Arthur dropped his whiskey glass. It shattered against the hardwood floor, mirroring the complete destruction of his carefully constructed empire. He looked at Colonel Vance, then at me, his eyes sticking around like a trapped animal. "It was a loan," he stammered, his voice cracking with desperation. "I was going to pay it back once the company stabilized. I did it for the family." "Save it for the federal judge, Mr. Whitaker," Colonel Vance snapped, pulling a stack of official, red-stamped legal documents from his briefcase and placing them firmly on the table. "You are facing immediate federal prosecution for grand larceny, wire fraud, identity theft, and the exploitation of military survivor benefits. The evidence compiled by our fraud division is absolute. You will look at a minimum of 15 years in a federal penitentiary." Arthur collapsed into his armchair, entirely deflated, his arrogance fully evaporated. He began to weep, burying his face in his hands. "Please," he choked out, looking up at me with pathetic, pleading eyes. "Maya, please. I'm your father. You can't let them do this to me. Talk to him." Colonel Vance slid a pen across the table. "There is one alternative. You sign over the full equity of your logistics company, this house, and all your personal assets directly to Maya as immediate financial restitution. If you sign, the military will decline to pursue federal charges, allowing the state to handle the asset transfer quietly. You have 60 seconds to decide." With shaking hands and tears streaming down his face, my father picked up the pen and signed away everything. 3 months later, I stood on the porch of a beautiful apartment near my new university campus, looking out at a horizon that finally belonged to me. With the full equity of the company sold and the house liquidated, I recovered every single cent my brother had left for me. I used those funds to officially reinstate my full-ride scholarship, finally pursuing the education my father tried so desperately to burn away. Arthur was forced to move into a tiny, rundown studio apartment on the edge of town, completely broke and stripped of the power he used to torment me.